Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining our LinkedIn Live today. I've really been looking forward to this conversation for a bit because today we're exploring how AI is driving a shift in enterprise preparation and storage of data to unlock its full potential, drive revenues, improve customer experiences, the full gamut of what AI can actually deliver. And today I have joining me Bob O'Donnell. He's the president and chief analyst of TECHnalysis Research. And he's been making a lot of headlines lately around the impact of AI in the enterprise. So I'm really excited to talk to him and share with all of you what he has learned. Bob, welcome.
Thanks, Trent. Happy to be here. Appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, very exciting. So, I'm excited about this topic because it's really central to what we're working on at Seagate. It's what we're hearing from our customers. We're seeing it in the market trends already. So let's just start with a little bit of context. Bob has recently concluded some research that quantifies how enterprise are shifting to AI, what that means for their infrastructure. You conducted feedback from business leaders all around the globe, and I'm just super excited to hear your findings. Why don't you share a little bit with us about what you learned?
Yeah, thanks, Trent. So, yeah, the study I did, I called it The Future of AI is Hybrid. And what I mean by hybrid, just to be clear, is the idea that when it comes to AI workloads, companies are thinking about not just necessarily doing it all in the cloud, but doing it within their own data center or enterprise or private cloud, and even on client devices. So, in the past, when we first saw the notion of hybrid cloud, it was the idea of, hey, we've got these public cloud resources, we've got AWS, we've got Google Cloud, we've got Microsoft Azure. Um, and then companies were adopting that cloud-based infrastructure, but running it locally because they realized there were some benefits. Well, take that concept a step further when it comes to hybrid AI, because hybrid AI leverages AI capabilities in the cloud from the big AI models, things like ChatGPT and Google Gemini and some of these things. But they're also applying some of those same principles and running similar types of models on-prem. And then finally, the other big twist is now we have the capability to run some of these things on device. And so the implications of this are huge because, initially everybody was like, oh, when it comes to AI workloads, it's all going to be in the cloud because that's where, these big cloud models were. But as companies have moved past the POCs, the proof of concepts kind of testing of these AI workloads, they've come to realize, hey, actually, this doesn't really make sense to do everything in the cloud. Because one of the things we've all learned about leveraging AI and Gen AI is the fact that you get the most value from it when you can customize it with your own data. And so it's access to that corporate data that becomes the secret sauce that allows companies to just use a generic version of an AI model or one that's been fine-tuned specifically to their unique needs and with their unique information. And that's fundamentally what's happening here. So we saw companies, start to talking about repatriating, that is moving workloads from the cloud into the enterprise. And of course, that means, and what they're doing is they're buying more enterprise servers. They're buying GPU equipped servers. We've got, people like Jensen Huang, the CEO of NVIDIA, who's been talking about enterprise AI factories, this idea that rather than relying on cloud-based resources, which of course you're going to use, you're also going to want some of your own resources. He's also taken it to the notion of sovereign AI, where individual
Yeah,
countries
exactly.
are going to have some of these capabilities. And then again, finally, now we're seeing more and more compute capabilities on the edge. And edge is sometimes a separate edge server device, but it's also oftentimes a client device like a PC in particular or a smartphone. So again, it's that combination. And we come back to this classic concept we've all heard about for a while, which is data gravity. That is, let's run the compute where the data lives. And it turns out a lot of that data continues to live in the enterprise. If you talk to the folks from IDC or Gartner or some of the other big research firms, they all talk about the fact that a huge percentage of data is still behind the firewall. And again, so all of this drives enormous demand for local storage and local compute. And that's what the study ultimately showed was the fact that that movement towards more of a hybrid AI architecture and the implications of that is starting to happen.
Yeah, I mean, that really just makes so much sense. And it ties in directly to what we're hearing from customers and trends we're seeing in the market, specifically around storage adoption and the storage growth that we've seen, very strong growth over the last year. Um, it's really not a one size fits all model. It just can't be, right? And there's always going to be applications that make the most sense in the cloud, that make most sense on-prem, and that make sense in edge devices. You mentioned phones, cameras are also a big space where,
Yes.
computer vision is just going to absolutely explode. And we all know that video data is the most dense data. So, that's another area where we just see an amazing opportunity for data growth. Um, it's not an easy journey though. Like getting there from where today's infrastructure and architecture are, you want data privacy, you want better latency, you want the data close to you. What are the three biggest challenges that you uncovered in your research that CIOs and enterprises face?
Yeah, I mean, the challenges are initially, it's about the data itself. Um, it's the classic, you have this challenge of garbage in, garbage out. One of the things we've learned with AI is, again, you can't just necessarily throw a bunch of data at it in any kind of format. There's often a lot of hard work to be done to figure out a data architecture. We've heard all about the evolution of data lakes and data warehouses and all of these different types of ways of organizing data. And so it's a combination of having access to these different data sources, organizing them, and then feeding them into these models. And, especially when it comes to this notion of AI workloads, again, you really got to refine this. And I bring it back. It's interesting because one of the things I also asked about in the study, and I will get to some of the other challenges in a second, but one point I wanted to make is a lot of companies are seeing the kind of back to the concept of big data. For those of us who've been, in the industry for a while, we remember maybe 10 plus years ago, everybody was like, oh, big data is going to solve everything, right? And the notion was, hey, if we just get all these different data resources together, we'll be able to, really get some amazing insights. The problem that you ran into was the fact that it turned out you had to be kind of a SQL jockey to figure out how to combine these different data resources. And there were
Yeah.
certain people who had those skill sets, but the business people trying to figure out how to get insights didn't. And the people who did the SQL jockeying didn't necessarily know the questions to ask. So you had this, these barriers that ended up forming. And the net is that big data never really lived up to its potential. So one of the really interesting things about Gen AI, of course, is its ability to allow you to ask a simple language, natural language query and get results. So that hard part of the SQL jockeying, as it were, has now gone away. And so, but you still have to do some work to get those data resources together. And oh, by the way, you want to continue to have access to them because what some people started to say is, well, you know what? We're not going to need that old data after all because we haven't been able to figure out a way to integrate it. Well, guess what? Now, all of those resources are theoretically available. Again, a little bit of work that's got to be done, but all of these things can be tapped into, excuse me. But then business people can ask the kind of queries they want to get. And then all of a sudden, a lot of the magic of these AI models is the ability to do that work of pulling different data sources together and providing insights into things that we didn't expect. So it's like the rebirth of big data is a really big part of this. So anyway, but data integration, back to my original point, was one of the biggest challenges. The other
Yeah.
thing is skills and personnel. AI in general is a new field, obviously. I mean, it's some people have been doing it, in labs for a very, very long time. But for the most people in IT, most end users, we're still learning what the heck this is and how to do it. And so the skill sets, aren't there. And one of the things this showed up early on, initially, some people said, hey, companies can build their own models. Well, we quickly realized that now that wasn't really realistic, and the skill sets to do that are extremely expensive and challenging. But what you can do is fine tune models. But again, learning how to do that is still hard. So a lot of companies are still struggling with this. And oh, by the way, not just with IT decision makers and the folks doing the behind the scenes work, but even end users. There's a huge
Training their
education gap
users. Yeah.
that has to be overcome as well. Because, I've joked for a long time that a chat prompt is like the DOS prompt of the 2020s. I mean, what do I type into it? I don't know. Like, I have no idea. And yet, it makes a huge difference. Changing the way you do prompts and everything else is a big deal. So that's just all a means of saying that skilling and education is a huge problem across the board for organizations. So again, data integration, skill sets, and then frankly, look, the other thing is it does cost money, right? As great as it is to say, hey, I'm just going to buy one of these, GPU equipped servers, that could be a big investment. We're talking 7, 8 figure kind of investments. That's a lot of money. It's a big bet to make. So there are certainly costs involved with it. And oh, by the way, that's just the servers. Let's not forget all the networking that we need in place, all the storage we need in place, all the connectivity between all of those elements. So those three things, data integration, skill sets, and costs are all challenges that people are seeing. But at the end of the day, they're recognizing, hey, if I'm looking long term, I am seeing this notion of a three-way split between public cloud, enterprise, and client. And that three-way hybrid split is really kind of redefining what we're doing with AI. Because again, like I said, it's about your own data. And most of that most precious data that companies want to use is still behind the firewall. So it's about opening up access to that data. And that's where the storage element becomes so critical.
Yeah, and it's really about a mindset shift, isn't it? Because you mentioned the cost to deploy, and obviously there's cost to deploy compute and cost to deploy networking and storage and everything else inside the infrastructure stack. But realistically, like customers are coming to the conclusion, and there's more and more awareness about the increasing value of data and that view of data as an asset, right? As an asset with a long-term value. It's funny, you think about it, maybe even 10 years ago, data was almost a burden. It was like, I have all this data. When can I get rid of it? And it's changing to a position of, okay, I realize now how valuable this asset is to my organization, the insights I can get from it, the discovery that can be done with the information that we have. So that's amazing. I mean, we've definitely seen retention expanding. We see retention expanding in the normal enterprise space all the way down to SMB and NAS, and definitely in video. Video retention, it tends to be more even policy driven, and we've seen some pretty clear moves, I'd say, in the last year towards longer retention policies.
Yeah, and I'm curious if you don't mind, Mike. Sorry to interrupt, but
Yeah.
obviously, I've been talking about the information that I've learned from this survey, which was over 1,000 companies across 10 different industries, both medium and large enterprise. So it was a pretty broad scope of folks. But you're in the trenches, right? You're actually digging in with these guys and gals that are doing some of the work. And I'm curious to learn from your perspective. You started to lay out some of the things you're seeing. What are some of the other things that you're seeing that do you think are driving this momentum?
Well, there's definitely this core notion of the value of data. So that's a key one, right? That's definitely a key premise around what can we learn from our data? What can we do to develop that knowledge, develop the outcomes and the discovery from that data? The second is the latency to get to the data. And that's definitely driving a key move towards more local enterprise level infrastructure and build out of data centers in that regard. And then I'd say, generally third is the expansion of data that is happening as a result of AI output, whether that's inference. I mean, training has its own data requirements, but once you get to inference, you start creating vector modeling. I mean, there's just so many things that go into the output of the AI data that we see that being generated as well. And it leads directly into that premise of, okay, well, where do I want to put this data?
Right.
Do I want to put the model logs that I have where I have to checkpoint my model? Do I want those in the cloud or do I want those close to me?
Yep.
And so, really, it comes down to kind of how you maximize the value of that data. And customers are trying. I think it's still a complex journey, right? That everyone has to go through. But it's, in the hybrid AI model, it's like, how do I maximize the value of where I put that data? And for us at Seagate, our whole value proposition, where we want to make it, very easy for customers to have heavy duty, highly scalable, reliable infrastructure that's purpose built for each of those environments. And that's kind of where we're focused.
Yeah, I mean, which makes a ton of sense. And I want to get at a point that you made, which is that it's a journey and there's a lot of challenges. And that's very true. And to be clear, one of the things that came out in the research is that there's going to be different demands for different types of applications. You in particular brought up video and computer vision. And so one of the things I did as part of the study was to understand, okay, what kind of workloads are companies doing right now when it comes to Gen AI? And it was the things you'd expect. It was content creation. It was a number of things like that. Code generation has become a big deal, of course. Data analysis, like we were talking about. But I also got into where are different workloads happening? And because I wanted to understand, hey, are we starting to see this three-way split already? And in point of fact, edge-based computing is a huge part of things like robotics, automation, computer vision, video storage. Already, a bunch of that is happening on the edge. So again, all the more reason to do analysis of that, where that data lives. So different workloads are going to work in different environments. And to be clear, not every workload is going to be in all three tiers, right? Some workloads are just going to continue to make sense in the cloud. Some are going to make sense to primarily be in a data center, and some on a client. But we are going to see this crossover where we're going to see maybe some client-based apps that leverage certain data resources in the enterprise, or perhaps they do it in the cloud. And I'll give you an example. One of the things we're starting to see is the rise of what are called AI browsers. And at first you're like, hey, no big deal. Like, my browser goes to the AI website and gives me a prompt box instead of a Google search box. But if you think about the fact that moving forward, these AI browsers are going to have models built into them and orchestration engines, you can imagine a scenario where you're running something, in a future version of a Google Chrome browser that is smart enough to know that a query that you're putting into it is really more of a prompt, and it's going to figure out, hey, I can solve some of this locally, and then I can put some of that in the cloud. And so that's yet an example of how people are rethinking where this work is going to happen. And as you said, the inference loads are going to be spread out all over the place. So we're going to see different solutions for different industries, for different applications. But the key takeaway is the fact that people are having to recognize this architecture and really shift away from this cloud-only mentality or a cloud-first mentality to something that I called a cloud-smart technology approach. And for cloud-smart, that means, hey, some things, like I said, are going to make more sense in the cloud and in leverage store theirs, but there are some things that are going to make more sense in other environments. And that's where those storage pieces become critical, and then figure out ways to communicate between them. One of the other challenges that we saw from the study in terms of an issue when it comes to cost, I talked about, infrastructure costs, but there's a lot of costs for data egress, if moving data back and forth to the cloud. And that's another reason why data gravity concepts of doing the compute where that data primarily lives just makes more sense. And the companies are, again, starting to get that big picture view. And they're like, oh, yeah, I got to think about this, and then think about what the implications of that are. And that's really kind of driving, I think, this movement towards hybrid AI. One last comment before, and then I'll turn it back to you for a sec. But I have to say it was fascinating. I was at CES this year, and I went to all the major keynotes from NVIDIA and Intel and AMD and Lenovo, all the big compute companies. Every single one of them used the phrase hybrid AI in their major keynotes, and they focused on how they were doing this. So clearly, because I did this study in the middle of last year and presented initially released the results in the fall, but the momentum towards hybrid AI is just growing, and I expect it's going to be a much, much bigger factor here in 26 and into the future.
Yeah, Yeah, absolutely. And organizations really need to start early and plan ahead. They need to focus on how and where their data is going to be stored. Think about, kind of not only the access and privacy and all the qualitative factors, but the ROI positioning of each of those models, like you said. I mean, they all have costs associated with them. So, in that regard, we really want to make sure that from a data availability standpoint, we're putting products out there that are allowing them to plan ahead and build their storage that's ready for the AI era. Build out storage that's ready for the AI era is something we've been planning for, frankly, for years.
Yeah.
You can see the explosion of data coming. We did the zettabyte study years ago, and it really was like when we laid down the plans for Hammer Technology and the innovation that we were going to go push there, it was really focused on this era and how we were going to purpose build technology for this transition.
Yeah, it is funny how, it kind of goes back to the infamous Bill Gates quote, why would anybody ever need more than, what was it, 512K of memory and,
Exactly.
and how much storage would they
Five
ever
megabytes. Yeah.
possibly need, right? And it's amazing how applications end up filling that and more. And I think that happens with storage, right? There was this thought as you guys were moving to these massive, 20, 30 terabytes of platter kind of technology. It's like, wait a minute, like who's ever going to use that? Well, guess what? All of a sudden, you've got all these data resources you're pulling together. You've got output being generated by these models at massive rates. And yes, all that storage is starting to be used, and companies are starting to realize, again, I can keep all of it, and I've got the tools and the ability to now query it in a way that actually will give me some meaningful data.
Well, Bob, thanks for a great discussion. I
Yeah.
think this has been absolutely invigorating and really exciting to talk about. Any parting thoughts from your standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, look, as we've kind of hinted at very strongly, it's clear that, there's a real value to data in the AI economy, and people need to think about that and think about how they're going to be able to leverage that. Because again, data, analysis of data at the end of the day is what we want to use for insights into how to make our businesses more efficient, how to respond more appropriately, how to customize things in a way and personalize responses in a way that I think these new tools are going to do it. But to get there, you've got to really think about data prep. Again, data prep and integration and all of these elements, they're a really big part of it. There's lots of different tools out there and companies working to figure out ways to better integrate that, new mechanisms for, everything from RAG and other fine tuning models that take your data and meld them with these bigger models, and figuring out how to do all that, I think, is really critical. But like you said, it's all about setting that infrastructure in place. How do we start to think about that? And it's clear
Yeah.
momentum is moving in this direction. So organizations need to be planning this and figuring out how they start to deploy it, because they're going to need that storage capacity. They're going to need to get access. They're going to want to have access to that data, and they're going to want to have the capability to try all kinds of permutations of different analysis. And that in and of itself is going to generate a lot more data as well. So it's clear there's a big opportunity moving forward for data, and companies just have to figure out the best way to leverage that.
Yeah, that's a great insight. Thank you. I mean, we're absolutely telling our customers they need to plan ahead. It's a complex journey, but being prepared for where your data is going to reside is an important factor in that journey. And the more customers plan ahead, I think this notion of so many companies starting out as cloud first, but moving to a more cloud smart, the thought process around infrastructure build out is really crucial. And so, that's a key message that we share with all our customers, and we've extended our planning horizons quite far out. In some cases, we're planning out as far as 2 and 3 years with some of the largest customers on this. So,
Yeah.
so it really is a crucial part of the plan. Well, Bob, thanks again. I think that pretty much concludes our chat for today. I'm looking forward to your upcoming article that details out how enterprises are shifting their infrastructure in the AI era, and look forward to reading that.
Great. Thanks, Trent. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Bob.